Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Quick test. Want to make sure everything is working. We're in broadcast mode. This is a new tool that I'm using to do this webinar. So if there's technical issues, we've got some help on the line for us. Let's see if we've got people showing up. Just chatting with the tech person. There we go. Hey, everybody. So I don't exactly see everyone on the line, how many people we have. Everything looks like it's working well. Bear with us just one moment as we make sure we get all this stuff up and running. We ran tests, of course, but you never know. All set here. Fantastic. All right, everybody, I'm still going to give folks a minute or two to join, just because, you know, the way things work in real life, we need a few moments. But feel free to go ahead and test out a few features here. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, you're going to see an option for Q&A. We're going to be using that feature to submit questions. You'll be using that to submit questions as I go. I'm going to make this as interactive as possible. So that's what you're going to use for questions to me. Now, if you want to chat, you should see an option for chat. And if you don't see the icon for chat, you're going to want to look for under the More tab, and you should see an option for chat there. And you'll also have an option of who to chat to. Make sure you chat to everyone, not just panelists, because that would just be for me and Eric Graham, who's tech support and is in the background and will be with us for the first half or so, just to make sure we get all the tech up. Fantastic. Detroit is represented. All the options are at the top of the screen. Yeah, awesome. Great. Looks like we're getting all set. Yeah, so welcome, everybody. I'm Chris Cowan, a Holacracy One coach and facilitator. I've been doing this work for over 3 years now, working with clients, helping them implement Holacracy, facilitating meetings. This webinar is really, you know, an introduction to Holacracy, a survey, if you will. The goal of this webinar is to answer all of your questions. I have never achieved that goal. What will likely happen is you will probably have more questions than you had when you began. So I'd like to go ahead and lower your expectations for what you may learn here. I hope I get the chance to answer many of your most pressing questions. There are lots of resources out there on Holacracy. If you're coming to a live webinar and you've made the time for it, I'm assuming you want to be able to have some sort of interaction. So again, make sure you use the Q&A feature, which is an option you'll see at the bottom or the top, I guess, depending. It just says Q&A, and you can submit questions there anytime. And then again, we've got Eric working in the background in case there's some problems with that. Fantastic. Everyone's saying hello in the chat. I love that. So yes, let's see what else. I think that's it in terms of administration. Let's go ahead and just jump into it. So before we talk about what Holacracy is and how it fits into the modern day, let's backtrack a bit and look at how things have been running in most organizations. So the image you see on your screen here is the typical traditional organizational pyramid, leader at the top, managers in the middle. And one of the, I think, most important things to kind of orient around here is that this has worked really, 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 really well for us for a long, long time. And in fact, let's go ahead and try out some of these features. Why don't you chat in answers to this question? What is good about this structure? What have we gained by using this structure in our modern organizations? So please use the chat feature to submit some answers. You can do that however randomly. Yeah, a chain of decision making, control and order. Span of control, I love that one. Clarity, efficiency, clarity of responsibility. Who makes what decisions, right? You know who's responsible for what. The pathways are clear. And so, yeah, All of that, of course, is true. The Industrial Revolution brought us the need for a management structure. The kinds of work that we were doing really required a focus on efficiency, right? Making sure that the decisions were made at the appropriate scope. The higher you're up in the organization, the broader your perspective, and therefore the bigger decisions that you make, right? It makes a lot of sense. So this has worked really, really well for us. It gives us efficiency. It gives us alignment, right? Like we are able to align and coordinate action into one direction. It gives us clear accountability and responsibility. We know who is supposed to be doing what. It gives us safety and comfort. I heard that too. We know who to blame, where the buck stops, or who to blame. It gives us a lot of a pathway for development and career path. There's a lot of structure to it, a lot of liberating structure. That's a term that I'm going to use a couple times today. The notion of liberating structure, having a structure that actually is orienting and comfortable to lean on. So yeah, this structure has worked actually great for us for a long, long, long time. The question that we're wrestling with, of course, today is, does this model fit the modern age in which change is happening all the time, and not just change, but the speed of change. Change is happening faster. We have globalization. Cultures all over are able to communicate with each other via the web, and the way we do work within an organization is very distributed. People can talk to each other asynchronously using email and chat and all these things that we just couldn't do before, and which we needed to have a lot of high-touch managers. So that's one question I want you to kind of to keep in mind as we go through this. Like, is this still working for us? And of course, I'm going to be presenting to you one possible option for all of that. So great, yeah, thank you for chatting in those answers. Those are fantastic. Keep those in mind. So what does Holacracy offer? Well, it offers us a different paradigm, a different way of organizing in which we have all the things that we talked about on the previous slide. We have alignment and clear accountability, and we have all of those things, but we don't have the manager function. We have order without bosses. The metaphor that I like to use for this is to think of a city and how a city operates, all of the resources that are available, all of the pathways, and each individual actor having responsibility and the freedom to take care of their own needs together within a shared rule set, right? So one of the pieces of research that I saw, I think, is a great example of this, which was guess how much food is on hand in New York City. How many days worth of food is on hand at any given time in New York City? How long would the current food in New York City last? Well, it's actually about 3 days. There's only about 3 days, yeah, 2 days, about 2 days of food in New York City at any one time with all the millions of people there. Only 2 days of food. And why is that? Why such a small buffer? Why is it so lean? Well, because the system of getting the food in and distributed has been carved out over so much time. It's emerged from all of these individual actors working to process their own needs according to a shared system, a shared set of rules. There's no mayor that tells the citizens of the city, you know, where to go, what decisions to make, where to buy their food, where to get flowers, where to, you know, all of those things are happening because we have an infrastructure there. And I think that metaphor of thinking about an infrastructure is really critical when you think about what holacracy is, because holacracy is not just a different way of organizing, but it really is a new paradigm. It's a different kind of different, which we'll talk about as I go on. Just check Q&A. Great, cool. And again, if you have questions as I'm going, I want to make this as interactive as possible. I don't know if the Q&A is working. I'm clicking on it and I don't see questions coming in via the Q&A. That's fine. If that's not working, feel free to use the chat and I'll try to address them as I go. Okay, so yes, let's get specific and look at some of the concrete elements of what holacracy is and how it is different than the traditional system that we're used to. So holacracy's approach is to define small, clear roles with clear power. So we want the clarity, right? We don't want to lose that. On the screen, you see an example of Brian Robertson, one of the co-founders of Holacracy One, has a role in our company called Holacracy Spokesperson. It's got a purpose listed there: crystallize and convey the Holacracy brand, reveal its why to the world, and a list of accountabilities. Now, roles are very different than a typical job description in a couple of ways. One, people have multiple roles within Holacracy. Those roles may take 40 hours a week of their time. It may take 5 minutes a week. It may take no time. It may be a completely reactive role that only is energized in response to somebody else. So that's one of the key differences with how Holacracy is structured. We don't have single individual job titles and each person is equated to a function. We deal with the people distinctly from the functions of the organization. So Holacracy is a rule set, a game, an infrastructure for the organization work, the functional pieces, not just the people pieces. And here you have a great example of what an individual component looks like, an individual actor, just like that city as an individual citizen. Everybody energizes multiple roles, and so at any given time, Brian may be energizing his Holacracy spokesperson role. And he has a purpose there to guide his action. Ultimately, what is the ultimate purpose of this role? Well, to crystallize and convey the Holacracy brand. However, that can be achieved. A list of accountabilities there. These accountabilities represent kind of like expectations, agreements, things that others can point to and rely upon, and ask Brian, how he's energizing it. Ask him to take projects according to his accountabilities. Let's like the third one there, defining criteria for acceptable speaking engagements, including format and budget constraints. My guess is that accountability works really well with the roles that plan the speaking events, because they want to have that criteria to look to. And so then expectation has been captured there. So this individual unit in Holacracy is what we call a role. And it's significantly different than what you would think of as a traditional job description, which we'll get more into. Yes, the PowerPoint will be available afterwards. I think the recording will be sent out as well after this is completed to everyone who's attending. So to serve your role, you have the full authority to make any decision or take any action as long as there's no rule against it. So once again, a very different kind of orientation. In most organizations, the default stance is you can't do anything unless you're given explicit permission. Holacracy has a different orientation. Its fundamental assumption is you can do anything as long as there's not an explicit rule against it, right? So the structure of the organization is largely capturing a sense of the limitations, the constraints, knowing that the purpose of the roles guide any given role filler to achieve that goal however creatively they wish. The full capacities and skills that they bring they can employ at their discretion as long as there's no rule against it. Again, another key distinction between how a role is structured and then what you may think of with a traditional job description. Now, with clear roles, we also have a chance to figure out how to work together. The phrase that comes to my mind is good fences make good neighbors. By clarifying boundaries, it defines for us the freedom that we have so we know how to get what we need. You'll see here another example of a role. There's an element, though, that on this role that was missing from the previous one. You'll see there under purpose, it has a domain. And a domain in Holacracy is essentially like a piece of property. This is another element to the rule set of a role. This role, web architect, filled by my colleague Olivier, means that he has control over the website. People can't just go and haphazardly update things on the website without asking for permission. So people still can do that, but they just need to ask permission first. So this is another way in which Holacracy captures the clarity of responsibility, of accountability, who's working on what, who's making what decisions in a distributed fashion across multiple roles. But it does so in a way that allows individual role fillers to integrate that information, energize the work to the best of their judgment, according to the limitations and the framework that is put out in front of them. Again, very much like a city with red lights and stop signs and yield signs, and all of those things are there to help people achieve the goals, and those goals, of course, being ultimately the purpose of any given role that they fill. Yeah, so the question here, where are those rules defined? How are the roles defined? We're going to get to that in just a second. An excellent, excellent question. Very, very key question. How is all this defined? Yeah. So ultimately, when we think about the distribution of power across these roles that have clear accountabilities and clear purpose, the question is, right, how do those things get defined? In Holacracy, we use a very unique meeting practice, and we call that the governance meeting. It's generally unlike anything else you would probably experience in a normal organization, largely because it is during that meeting that the roles and the domains and the purpose and all of those things get defined. The authorities themselves get defined. So in order to do that well, you obviously want to have a fair process that allows a voice for everyone involved on the team to be able to determine what roles are doing what. And everyone has a fair voice in doing that. The process, though, is very, very specific. It's very rigid, facilitated by certified facilitators, because it's very difficult to just do it on your own. And if you're curious about the more specifics of that meeting process, it's a little bit outside the scope of this particular webinar, but feel free to go to holacracy.org/governance or governance meeting, and it'll give you all of the concrete steps of what that process looks like. So this evolutionary process through this meeting allows us to constantly update the structure itself. An organization in Holacracy is not just designed by a couple of key power holders or consultants that come in and do a reorganization every 3 to 5 years and try to, as close as they can, approximate the right structure for the current environment, right? That's really what it's about, setting the right infrastructure there so that it matches and that the resources can be deployed, both money and people's time and energy, right, as resources, making sure those can be deployed in the most effective way based on the current environment. In Holacracy, we do this practice at least monthly. We also have asynchronous ways of doing this, but the point is that we're constantly evolving this. It's not a design that one person even comes up with. Everybody has a voice to make proposals, to object to how these authorities get defined, and that ensures that empowerment isn't just a word that's thrown around. Literally, everyone does have a voice in that process to help define the authorities themselves. And again, the specifics of that you can find online. So that's the way that another key distinction that Holacracy makes is that organizational design doesn't happen on a 3 to 5 year frequency. Change is happening too fast for that, right? It's not fast enough. And we feel that as employees in organizations that work under the traditional system, we're constantly bumping up against a mismatch between how things are currently structured, the organizational chart as it is, and kind of what it needs to be. That will probably always be true. There'll be a little bit of tension between those two things. The goal with Holacracy, of course, is just to make sure that it as closely approximates it as possible. So by having this process in which everyone has a voice, we can make sure that the actual organizational structure matches the needs of the environment as quickly as possible. Great, thanks, Eric. Yeah, Eric put a link to the governance meeting online. Oh, great, I see some Q&A questions. Oh, man. Oh, we're gonna have some fun with these. Yes, okay, great. Those are great questions. I'm gonna keep going because some of them may be answered, but we've got time at the end to go over them. I'm gonna make sure I answer as many as I can. Great, thanks. Okay, so I mentioned this governance process, but again, I think you're probably wanting a better sense of what this actually looks like. So we looked at the individual role unit. We looked at what that looks like and the perspective of an individual role. Here's an example of what a team kind of looks like. These are different roles you see on the screen in a circle, which was essentially like a team that we call outreach, our marketing circle. As an example of how the governance process works, every single team member in every circle runs their own governance meeting. So every circle within Holacracy has their own governance meeting, and there are circles within circles within circles. We'll look at that in just a second, but also ensures that not just from a broad perspective, this governance meeting isn't just happening at the highest level, it's happening all over in a very kind of cellular or fractal way. These circles build to bigger circles, et cetera, et cetera. So this process ensures that everybody has a voice, and they're using this role structure. You can see a couple listed there. You'll see Holacracy spokesperson, again, on the upper left, Holacracy presenter, which is the role that I'm currently energizing, delivering this webinar, community host. So there's several there. When you go to this governance meeting, you're coming from some of these perspectives, some of these roles, things that are getting in your way of maximizing your creative contribution to the organization. Those are what we call tensions, and you bring those to the governance meeting, and that is what ultimately creates these roles. And as I mentioned before, people have multiple roles. So even though you see several circles there with several roles, you know, this actual team may only be made up of 3 people, you know, who have multiple roles across this circle. Let's see. I'm going to take this one. How do we deal with outliers in the governance meeting, people who are not very collaborative or perhaps pushing our issues outside? Yeah. Again, the process itself is so rigid, it's very, very difficult to do that. It's one of the key areas we have to work on when we're implementing this, because that process is so different and unique. I would love to probably just have a webinar just on that process itself. But it's a good question. It's something that if you get a chance to attend one of the live tasters, it's like 3.5 hours, I believe, so that you can see a simulation, or I think we have some resources online as well to see what a governance meeting really looks like. You'll get a better sense of why it's so difficult for people who don't want to play to really mess things up. They actually have a lot of opportunity to contribute in that actual process. So that's the governance meeting. And all of this really comes back to a shared framework, an infrastructure, like I said, like a rule set to ensure that everybody in the organization is allowed to follow the same rules. The founder, the CEO, has no more authority to make decisions outside of this rule set than anyone else. This shared rule set, we call this every game needs a good rule book, and that's essentially another good metaphor for thinking about what holacracy is. Of course, people energize these roles, but just like a team sport, there are different positions for that sport, and there are rules that define how the game is played. That's essentially what the Constitution is. In fact, you could even say that holacracy is the Constitution. It is that rule set, and that's it. Everything else are ways of best practices of how to energize those rules, how to play by the rules, moves and strategies and techniques to achieve effective results according to the rules. But the rules themselves become the foundation, so much so that when we implement this in companies, the companies that are using this, they start off with what we call a ratification, which means whoever currently has the power within an organization, whether that's the CEO or the president, the owner of the company, signs this Constitution as a symbol that this rule set is now the power holder, the formal power holder of the organization. It is the power holder. It defines how decisions are made. It includes the governance process. It includes duties for different roles, all of those things. And with that basic framework in place, then, every organization, through the governance, through its operations, creates its own unique manifestation. So this rule set is agnostic, as you will. It's not specific to any industry. It's not specific to any product. It's not specific to any size organization. This is the core rule set to help you decide how to create all of those things, how to design your organization. Obviously, you need to be able to have some clear way of pointing to the rules to say, oh, you can't do that. This is not allowed. This is allowed. And it takes a little bit of time. I would say if people often want to kind of look at the Constitution, I encourage you to. Again, it's available online. I think holacracy.org/constitution. It's all there, the rules. The problem, of course, is that reading the rules don't really tell you what it's like, just like a sport. You could read the rule book for soccer or football, baseball, but if you don't really see it being played, if you haven't experienced the game of it, the rules themselves don't really make much sense on their own. But for us, for everyone using this Holacracy thing, the Constitution is the core element. It is a shared rule set that all organizations use, and that allows us to do a couple of neat things that we'll talk about later, ways of creating these teams, this governance, these policies, and purpose of organizations, and share them across organizations as appropriate, because we all have the same basic operating system working underneath. So that's what the Constitution is about. Oh, so many good questions. I think I might actually just save some of these questions, but they're excellent. I can't wait. Cool. So that's the Constitution. Key piece. Again, if you remember nothing else, just think of Holacracy is the Constitution. It is those rules. It's a fairly boring, accurate, but technical answer, pedantic answer. If you really want to see what this looks like, I'm going to give you, we're going to look at actually Holacracy 1's governance itself. I'll pull up the tool that we use, GlassFrog, which are where these images are coming from, the tool that stores all of this and allows us, quite frankly, to actually run a system like this. It's not just a theoretical idea about how to distribute authority. The technology that we have actually allows normal people to use this day to day. So replacing the management hierarchy, this is what an org chart looks like in Holacracy. As I mentioned, circles within circles. Each of these different circles that you see labeled, GCC, the biggest one, that's just an acronym that stands for General Company Circle, just a default name that we label kind of the broadest circle. And then there are several sub-circles. You could think of these as teams. Service delivery, which handles implementations. Again, this is a real copy of Holacracy 1, although I think a bit old, but it gives you a sense of it. People and partnership, which handles a lot of the people stuff, which we'll talk a lot about today. And then community outreach, which I mentioned was kind of the marketing function. And then the GCC, of course, has roles within it. And each of these sub-circles essentially is like a role within the broader circle. So every circle has a couple of elected roles. It has a rep link role. That role is its purpose is about removing constraints in the circle's broader environment. So if you were in people in partnership and the rep link for people in partnership, if you're in the rep link role and you have that, you're worried about constraints in the broader GCC, things that are limiting the ability of people in partnership to truly express its purpose. The other key role, which is not elected, is called a lead link role. There's a lot of questions about this. I think it's another important point. I've got a whole slide on it coming up. The lead link is essentially kind of like a team lead with some very critical, important differences. But for the sake of argument for now, think of it like a team lead. So the lead link kind of holds the purpose for the entire circle, all of those different roles within it, holds the purpose for the entire circle, and also represents this sub-circle at the broadest circle. So every governance meeting, every tactical meeting, lead link and rep link are there from these sub-circles, and that's, again, a way in which the alignment kind of cascades down from the broadest circle, the highest points, all the way down to the smallest roles within the smallest circles. And again, we're going to look at a couple of examples I can show you and drive you around, as it were, a bit of what Holacracy 1 looks like. And we'll have plenty of time for some questions. Cool. Yeah, so I'm going to just jump right into this. The traditional manager versus a lead link. I mentioned the lead link, and I think this is a good framework for thinking about, for kind of maybe sparking some questions and giving you a sense of some of the key core differences. So in a traditional organization, a manager defines priorities, provides feedback about role fit, just the jobs people fill, the skill fit. That's one thing that they're accountable for. Allocates resources across the circle. Ability to hire and fire people, direct the work of others, ability to veto the decisions of team members. But of course, you'll notice there that the lead link shares those first three. Lead link also defines priorities, provides feedback about role fit, allocates resources, but actually has no authority whatsoever about hiring and firing of people from the organization. They have some authority about who may fill a given role within their circle, but the fact that you leave a role within a circle doesn't mean you're fired. You may have plenty of other roles in other circles, right? So the lead link has no authority over the people and their agreements or relationship with the organization itself. Further, while the lead link may define priorities, the lead link has no authority to direct the work of others. So in Holacracy, a lead link may say, this project is more important than this project, or this project is your highest priority. In this circle, this is your highest priority. The role filler then uses their best judgment to energize their work appropriately. Again, a role filler in an organization may have several roles across several circles. They have to weigh out those priorities across multiple circles. So the defining of priorities happens from the lead link, but the lead link doesn't tell somebody, you absolutely must do this. You can make a pitch, can suggest, share all the data he or she wishes, can ask what the next actions are, can ask what's being prioritized over this, and try to remove any blockages to that role filler energizing that work, but has no ability to define specifically, work on this right now. The other thing that the lead link cannot do, another way of maybe even saying it would be the ability to veto decisions of team members. The lead link in Holacracy, in many ways, is largely administrative. The defining of priorities and strategies, yes. Trying to make sure people has the human resources to fill roles, yes. By default, allocating resources, yes. But other than that, anything that's actually happening, the actual work of the organization, if it's a marketing circle, let's say, all the marketing work, the lead link of the marketing circle doesn't do any marketing. The lead link role doesn't do any marketing. It has 5 accountabilities, and none of them have anything to do with marketing. If the person who's filling the lead link role also happens to have a lot of expertise in that area, a lot of skill in that area, then it's quite likely they will also have other roles in that circle. And by making that split, by differentiating out the key needed functions, of course, going back to the traditional pyramid that we looked at, having clarity and alignment and all of those things we don't want to lose. So the lead link has some of those, and then we differentiate out hiring and firing of the organization, which again, we always get questions about, so I'll talk a little bit about that, and vetoing or blessing the decisions of others. Again, we want the individuals within the organization to be able to energize their roles at their own discretion, as long as they're not breaking a rule, right? We have rules in place that can kind of define it, but there's no need for an individual role filler to get approval from a lead link to perform their work. One of the key differences. Yeah, the different colors of the roles. In fact, you know what? Let's do this. I'm going to take. I'm going to stop sharing this, and I'm going to take you for a quick little tour on our organization. So let me do share screen. Now you should be able to see, let me know if you don't in the chat, anyone. You should be able to see our organization. So this is Holacracy 1. Currently structured, having evolved over just shy of 10 years now, using this rule set, even evolving the rule set. So if you look at our general company circle, you'll see several large circles. These are, again, these sub-circles of our organization. This Glass Frog team here is the team that developed this actual product. So on a day-to-day basis, as anyone who's filling roles is energizing their work, they can look and refer to this structure to find out quite literally who is doing what. And a lot of organizations, of course, it takes a long time to figure out how things actually work around here, right? A lot of job descriptions include something like other duties as assigned. Which are, kind of like band-aid ways. They're effective because, most organizations use the traditional system and need some way of accounting for that. So in that regard, they're perfectly fine. But of course, they hide a lot of the clarity that we want an organization to use. So if I'm in this training circle, this again is essentially like my team. And I can look at any of these roles. Let me see if I can find one. Where's training design? Perfect. So training design, let me see if you can see that better. Here's one of the rules that I fill. Like before, enable deep transmission through awesome programs and materials with a list of accountabilities. So again, anyone else in this circle can rely on me to take projects. I have a duty to track those projects. If people ask me, what are my next actions or what am I working on to energize, let's say, this accountability, define and publishing a definitive source of prerequisites, I have a duty to respond and process that request within my team. So that's how the work looks from a team perspective. But from the broader perspective, again, you see we have all of these connections. The governance meeting process defines all of this. And all of these sub-circles, again, function like roles within the broader circle. So when these represent themselves at governance meetings, they're representing the whole of outreach or the whole of Holacracy training. Okay, so people are sitting on so many questions, so I'm going to take a pause here while we have this up, and I'm going to answer a few. So I see one here. How do you deconflict potential duplication of accountabilities? Quite simply, it's just a matter of the governance process. So if you have two roles that have similar accountabilities, that creates confusion. You know, we want clarity. We want to know who's responsible for what. So likely you would go to a governance meeting. You would propose some solution, either deleting the accountability from one role. There's so many different solutions. It's hard to know exactly what would be the best fit, but you'll propose some solution to reduce that clarity. Let's just say removing that accountability. It goes to the process, and then there you go. That ends up getting solved. And how are role accountabilities? Let me just click this. Cool. How are role accountabilities advertised within the organization? Great question. Now, an organization of our size is small enough, we're under 20, that it's pretty easy to share information if a role is vacated. People aren't assigned roles against their will. They're voluntary. So a lead link of a circle has an accountability for filling roles. If a new role gets created, let's say in a governance meeting, the lead link is accountable for finding someone to fill the role. And until someone is filling the role, the lead link holds that role by default. So there are lots of different ways of trying to advertise or shop around for different role fillers. For an organization the size of Zappos, over 1,500, they've got a whole software tool that allows them to do that. Coming up, we're going to take just a quick peek at Zappos's structure a little while ago to give you a sense of how Holacracy scales, but great question. And great, here's a good one. One concern that I have is that this model may not be adopted by all people. It is linked to the type of person with some sort of entrepreneurship skill. Yes, yes. Usually people are used to receiving orders. The question is, what skills do you consider important to a person to acquire the ability to succeed in the Holacracy model? Or am I wrong? And perhaps everyone could adapt to this model. So truthfully, I don't think everyone can adapt, at least currently. And I think honoring that and just acknowledging that as a reality is really important. In fact, one of the things that Holacracy brings is a lot of clarity to those kinds of to those kinds of orientations, or a mismatch of expectations, or a mismatch of purpose. Even David Allen and David Allen Companies, if you know the author of Getting Things Done, David Allen, his company uses Holacracy, and he has this great anecdote about when they were implementing, they had someone who left the organization after struggling a lot with Holacracy and the implementation and the change. But they came to the realization that it was actually just a mismatch of direction. The company was moving into a different direction than that individual wanted, and actually found another job, another kind of career path that was very exciting to them. The whole process of clarifying this is what the organization is doing and surfacing that data, there's no issue with that. The fact that some people may leave, I think, is actually true of any significant change. You can't make everybody happy, and you really do want and need that alignment. So, Zappos's approach of providing compensation monetarily for those who willingly say, you know what, this kind of work style is not for me. So I think there are lots of ways of doing that well and just honoring it. Holacracy is a lot like, I think, kind of like an X-ray. If you go to a doctor and you get an X-ray and you've got you've got a broken leg or something, you wouldn't think of the X-ray creating that problem, right? The problem was there. Holacracy often just brings these issues out that have been there for a long time, quite often, and provides pathways for it. So with all of that said, of course, a certain amount of self-directedness helps. And I think by providing the opportunities, you actually can prompt or encourage that. But I would be wary of saying that everybody should be this way before they are ready to make that change for themselves. I think honoring where everyone is an important piece of this. Let me do a couple more. What about approvals? Yeah, it's a great question. What about approvals? So I said before, like lead link doesn't approve the work, right? It doesn't bless the work, but that doesn't mean that's not needed, right? So of course there are occasions, there are processes, types of work that might require a review of some sort. But again, it's quite simple actually. You have a role that has an accountability for reviewing whatever material, and a role that may have an accountability for creating that material. The role that's creating it may also have an accountability for integrating objections from the approving role. So there are ways of structuring the governance across roles or in policies, which we don't have time to get into a lot today, that you can capture these kinds of things. There's almost generally nothing in the traditional organization that you can't translate into Holacracy. The big difference, of course, is underneath it all, the paradigm underneath it, the orientation, the difference between you can do anything unless it's explicitly forbidden versus the only things that you can do are things that you've been explicitly given permission to do. So that fundamental orientation and the processes for creating the rules makes a big difference over time. So good question. Is this feasible for large organizations? Yep, we're going to look at Zappos right now. Cool. Awesome. Great. All right, so yeah, so this is, again, an example of what an organization looks like in Holacracy. Day to day, the work that is performed, I refer to this constantly. There's a couple of options you'll see near the top of the screen. You'll see a list of all my roles here. So if I ever need to reference that, I can look at all of the roles that I fill across the organization. And I can rely on other roles in the implementation circle if I need some help. Let's see, delivery systems might be a good one. Yeah, so if I'm energizing my coach role in this circle and I need help from Eric, who is also doing some tech support for this webinar, I can look to delivery systems and I can look at these accountabilities, selecting, maintaining, configuring systems to support the scheduling of Holacracy advisor calls. So when I energize that role, if I have any issues or problems, I know exactly who to go to, because this governance, again, is updated on a regular basis. And if there is, for some reason, some gap, because again, there often is, we take that to the governance meeting and we update it. That's essentially how the process works. Can people have the same role? Yes, they can. I think I showed you an example in training. In fact, me and Brian fill the same role here in training design. The key thing, though, is you want to have a focus. Make sure it's clear who is doing what. So in this role, I focus primarily on the coach training, and Brian has a focus for the certification training and taster workshops. So we energize all of these accountabilities, but for different products. Because again, you want to have a clear owner, right? You want to know whose baby everything is. That's essentially the process. Cool. Awesome, great questions. All right, I'm going to leave this little tour again of Glassfrog and what our company looks like, and go back to the presentation, because I've got a good example, I think, of what it looks like a larger scale. So this isn't a live picture of Zappos. I can't navigate this the way I could navigate the previous slide. But it gives you a sense. In fact, I mean, these circles are, they get so small, they don't even show up at this scale. But the idea, again, is that this works as a fractal structure. And in that way, scale isn't a problem. It just scales up. Every circle is doing its own work. There are roles, again, I mentioned the lead link and the rep link, that operate at the boundary between a subcircle and its larger circle. So they represent the circle operationally. They can represent the circle in governance to evolve and adapt the structure itself. So with all of that in place, it just works kind of like a fractal. And because people are energizing roles, someone may energize several roles in the smallest subcircle, way down here on this diagram. They may energize several roles. And they also may be lead link of this flywheel ops, right? Like the distribution and the roles that people energize can be extraordinarily varied. There's a great anecdote from Zappos about a fairly new young employee who in their role marketplace, we had that question before, there was a role there for doing essentially kind of like a party planning function that he had some skill in. It was a very high level important event that was coming up that the role was needed for, but he pitched himself for it, and he got it, and he rocked it. He did an amazing job. And the funny thing about it was, he said in a traditional organization, him pitching himself for that work would have been like going over the heads of his boss's boss's boss, right? It would have been political suicide to try to jump that many levels in the hierarchy and say, hey, I want that job. But again, because Holacracy is able to break down all of the functions to as small a unit as needed, it allows an individual person to maximize their very creative potential, to seek out whatever career path they may want, because they're able to energize so many different roles simultaneously. That differentiation between the person and the role is another reason why in day-to-day practice, a lead link is very different than a manager. There's several examples in Zappos that I can think of, but just generically speaking, if you imagine yourself being a lead link of a role yourself, so you're the lead link, you're the kind of, feel like the team lead of a role, but you have several roles. So you have that lead link role, but you also have a role within another sub-circle. This, again, happens in Zappos. There's somebody within the circle that I'm lead link of, so they have a role within my circle. But on the other hand, I have roles within a circle that they are the lead link of. So in that circle, I'm integrating the priorities and the strategies. I'm asking for resources, but when I'm doing the work in this team or in this circle, it's just the opposite. And when you think about how that plays out in real life, that means when those two people meet or pass each other in the hallway, there's not a hierarchy of people, right? There's hierarchies of roles and of work, absolutely. But that hierarchy is only at play when we're actually talking about the functions of the organization. When you have two people who basically are opposites and flip-flop, one's the lead link of a circle, the other's the lead link of the other circle, and they have roles within each other, it's certainly not clear kind of who is the manager, right? It doesn't add up, doesn't compute. It's just simply not there. So it's another way in which Holacracy is extraordinarily kind of clear and rigid, both in terms of its rules, in terms of the roles that are defined, and clears in terms of the decision making, the hierarchy, the alignment. All of that is super, super clear, and yet it doesn't put that burden directly on the people themselves. That differentiation, what we call the differentiation between role and soul, is extraordinarily important, and one of the key distinctions about this paradigm being different, a different kind of different than what you may see with any other kind of intervention. Cool. Let me just take a sip of coffee. It's not that early here, but I'm still drinking coffee. Okay, great. Cool, awesome. All right. I just got really like a summary slide, really, of kind of the broad key shifts. I think it may have even been able to go sooner and give you an orientation, but I think, again, when you're coming away from this webinar, I'm going to spend some time directly with each of these questions. But these are the kind of the big four, I would say, the key shifts that make Holacracy different than other kinds of approaches. The first, get my animation working, I talked about was the difference between the static job descriptions and the dynamic roles. The roles themselves change. I can take roles and I can vacate roles. And it is the roles themselves don't affect my pay, which of course you want to figure that out, how to do pay, and I'm sure we'll talk about that in some of the Q&A. But obviously it's a major difference. When I talk about my work in Holacracy 1, right? What's my job? I have 30. Literally, I'm not being poetic about it. Like, I literally have 30 different jobs. Now, in some periods of time, I've used a lot of my time to energize a few of them. Doing marketing things or doing the course design. So I may tell somebody that that's what I'm doing, but truly, the ability to energize and take on different roles, and the fact that lead links by default own that work until they find somebody, create a nice parity. Lead links can't just assign someone to a role without their permission. But people obviously, the organization is probably going to want some sort of policy around a number of roles, or maybe not that, maybe an amount of time, a percentage of their time spent dedicated to the organization. So there are ways of accounting for all those things, but it's important to keep them separate, again, from the people and the pay and the time that they're dedicating. Because if you fuse those two things, you basically end up right back with the organizational pyramid that we had before, which we know causes lots of problems. So delegated authority, constitutional authority. Again, a key difference here between how leadership works. There's obviously a big difference between delegating a task and delegating a decision, right? So in most traditional kind of leadership development approaches, that's my background. We would start emphasizing the need for coaching and delegating decisions, not just delegating tasks. I think Holacracy takes that even further, because it's not just an individual owning the power and delegating decisions down to somebody else. We have a governance process. That's the way authorities are defined. Everyone has a voice in that. And again, it's extraordinarily rigid so that the conversation doesn't devolve to kind of a consensus. It's a very specific, focused process. But we use the rules of the Constitution to enact that process, and that process itself defines the authorities. And that's one way in which, again, you can get true empowerment and allow for the dynamic evolution of the organizational structure to ensure that it's the best match for the current environment. Similarly, again, most organizations will use large-scale reorgs every 3 to 5 years, typically. In Holacracy, we use, again, what we call tensions. Tensions are any sort of problem or issue or opportunity. Anything that you feel needs to be changed is what we call a tension. And that evolutionary process is driven by the real experience of people on the front line everywhere across the organization. Every individual has pathways to process those tensions and to make an impact, an improvement on the organization itself. And through all of those individual small steps, we end up with this emergent structure. That org chart I showed you before of Holacracy 1, no person designed that, right? Nobody sat down and drew that out. It's the constellation of the collection of all of our individual efforts and improvements and proposals over a number of years, and of course it will continue to change. So we truly don't have any reorg that happens at any 3 to 5 year basis. It's also one of the new things that Holacracy introduces, almost like as an expectation. Someone asked before about the people, and are there some people who just that won't fit some of the expectations around entrepreneurship or self-directedness. I think this is another new thing that people are engaged in, is the actual organizational design. Everybody now is an organizational designer in a way, whatever scope that they wish to process their tensions. That's often a new skill that people also have to learn, how to propose or craft governance in a way that meets their needs. The process itself helps people out with that, but it's truly a new thing that every individual person in the organization will be contributing to, which they didn't before. And then finally, alignment by politics versus alignment by governance. Again, this is one of the biggest differences for me personally that I've experienced. I mentioned the role structure and the circle structure, and I can look to accountabilities, which again are the governance. When I look at those accountabilities, I can ask Eric, can you take a project to update your checklist for setting up the technology for the Holacracy advisor calls, something like that. And I can point to the accountability and say, according to that accountability, that's why I'm requesting the project. And the question that Eric has to ask himself, it's not does he want to do the project, it's does it fit? And his interpretation, does that work live with that role? That's the question. If so, he would take the project and track it. From there, I may ask for a prioritization. I may say, hey, where is that on your list of priorities? Or can you give me a projection on when you might be able to complete it? And if he tells me a year from now, then I might follow up and ask, how can I help? How can I move that up? It's important that it get done. I can't do it myself. How can I remove barriers for you? Every individual person owning their own stuff, right? But using the guidelines that we've all created through the governance the accountabilities, the roles, the policies, relying on those, pointing to those quite literally and saying, this is what I'm leaning on to make this request. And these are the different moves, again, defined in the Constitution that we can make that allow us, of course, organizational politics and human social interactions, of course, are filled with all sorts of interesting dynamics, which do ultimately still impact the work. Don't get me wrong, I can talk a little bit more about how that actually functions. But Holacracy's rule set allows the functions of the organization to operate as much as possible outside of that. If you think of a sports team, many championship sports teams, if you look behind the scenes of what was going on in the locker room, everybody's not necessarily friends. There are little cliques, right? People like certain people and they're friends with certain people. Everyone doesn't hang out. People might not even like each other in the locker room, but when they get out onto the court or onto the field, right, they play the game. They don't throw the ball to first base because they like John, who's the first baseman. They throw it there because that's the play that needs to be made. And that's exactly how Holacracy works when we start talking about the functions of the organization. And it also then allows us to step off the field, to be in a break room and say, you know what, I'm not engaging in my roles or work right now. Let's just have a chit chat as people. That distinction allows us to stay focused on the purpose of the organization and keep our own personal stuff, our own personal agendas from putting a drag on the purpose of the fulfillment of the organization itself. So I'm going to leave you with this thought, and then I'm going to spend 15, 20 minutes just answering as many of these questions as I can rapid fire. Hopefully some of this stirred up some questions. Again, I always wanted to answer all of your questions, but it just frankly can't. But feel free, again, I put my email address on there. You can email me directly with any questions. I'll make sure it gets to the right role. And my kind of statement to leave you with is, again, that when you clarify boundaries, everyone knows what freedom they really have. That's what we like about the traditional system, right? It allows for alignment and for clarity. But the fact of the matter is there's the way the organization looks from the traditional org chart, and then there's the way things actually operate. People are fused with their roles, and that simple move right there means that the organization cannot possibly adapt or evolve to match the needs of its environment. We have to come up with a better way of truly empowering people, giving them opportunities to maximize their deepest creative potential and get really amazing, awesome work done in the world. My work with Holacracy has been transformative. I come from a traditional consulting and traditional organizational background. I have my doctorate in human and organizational learning, and so I did consulting and leadership development for many years. And I can tell you, when I found this, I realized, this is truly a new paradigm, a way of working together that I think is really critical and needed for the world that we're facing today. So thank you all again. I'm going to stay on and answer any questions, but people have to drop off. That's the webinar. That's my quick survey overview of what Holacracy is all about. And let me just go on with some questions. Let me check the chat and drink some water because my throat is really dry. Okay, yeah, there are some questions. Okay. Okay, great. I'm going to dive into questions. I'm going to go with the oldest first. Perfect. I'm going to clear these off. Bear with me 1 second. Yep, answered that one. Hi, do you have governance meetings at every circle? If so, how do you achieve quorum if you have to go through every level, and how long does it take typically? Great questions. So there's no quorum in the meetings. The meetings themselves are voluntary. They happen so frequently, though, that should there be anything that's off, you can always change it later, right? We're not. It's not like a reorg that we lock in stone for a long period of time. So we really have to make sure we get it right. We definitely don't want perfect to get in the way of good. So these meetings are happening on a constant basis. So if you can't attend one, you can always ask someone to represent your role. If you really need, but quite often, if there's anything that actually causes a tension for you, it actually creates a problem in practice, then you just note that yourself and you take it to the next meeting. That's essentially how that works. And the meetings themselves typically take, I would say, about an hour and a half to 2 hours. Depends on their level of practice. Early practice may take a little longer. Yeah, about an hour to 2 hours for a governance meeting. Great question. Can the Holacracy organization construct cope with rapid changes and they need to reorganize, e.g. when a program moves into a news phase? Oh yeah, of course. So this is again where I can give a very accurate but horribly unsatisfactory answer, kind of the consultant answer by saying, well, it depends. So can the construct cope with it? Well, absolutely. The way in which you actually design that process, the projects moving through phases, shows up in a few different ways. So again, you can create a project team if you need to. You could have a role responsible for each phase of the product delivery. That may be workable for a while. Based on the resources you have and the needs, that may work. You may have a project manager who's kind of overseeing and trying to ensure that it's meeting its targets. All that, you may do it that way. You may have one role in charge of one function and another role in charge of another function across the whole spectrum of the development cycle, right? So when you look at different ways of organizing, by function, by division, matrix, by region. You see all these different ways, and they're all very understandable attempts to try and give more dynamism to the way that we structure the work around us. Holacracy, of course, I think is just built on a much stronger foundation, and therefore creating roles as needed is already there. So whatever you need for the project phase, the manufacturing, you'll create, and then if it's not helpful, if having those roles and those accountabilities doesn't quite match the need, then you'll change it. That's how that works. Can people have the same role? Yep. Without a boss, what are the accountability structures? Well, quite honestly, everyone's accountable to everyone else according to the rules of the Constitution. In other words, there are certain duties that need to be fulfilled, certain rules you can point to, and generally speaking, I would say adults that are rational who understand this is the agreement, this is what we're abiding by, respect that and respond to it. Another part of your question that I'm going to interpret is kind of like, what do you do then when someone just isn't doing their job? Someone's just not keeping up. Quite frankly, they just stink at their job. What do you do with them? My answer is kind of like, well, what do you do in a normal organization when that happens, right? You need to have a process for identifying that and dealing with it to whatever capacity. So at Holacracy One, we have a policy that specifies our process for doing that. We have partner reviews at a certain sequence. And again, with the governance structure being based on a shared constitution, organizations using Holacracy can share this governance. It's what we call apps. You can share a Holacracy app for dismissal or firing, a process that works really well, and say, you know what, I want to use that process in my organization, and you could propose it as a policy. So that's ways that Holacracy handles traditional performance management kinds of functions, and training and hiring and firing, all the things that I said the lead link doesn't do. Of course, you need to have ways of dealing with that. But the answer is again, like whatever the organization needs, however its process needs to be defined, it'll figure out. And there's lots of role models out there, lots of organizations using this system that share their governance. And the community of practice we have for Holacracy, a whole page is dedicated to what we call our app store, which is just nothing but these kinds of policies and procedures, different kind of functions, different things that are needed that aren't specified in the Constitution and aren't intended to be. But great question. That seems like a lot of circles for 3 persons. Yeah, can this model overcomplicate things? I suppose it could overcomplicate things. I haven't heard of it overcomplicating things in practice, though. Again, most people in my organization have 20 to 30 roles. Some people have just 3 or 4. Some of the programmers in Glassfrog are dedicated to Glassfrog and spend all their time with that. But most people have 20 to 30 different roles, and that can vary. So day to day, when you think about energizing your work, you have to make some judgment calls. And if you're not quite sure what's the highest priority, well, again, there's a lead link to lean on at the higher circle if need be, to get the data to say this is the most important project over these projects. So there are ways in which processes, moves in which an individual person in an organization using this system can best navigate all the different roles that they have across an organization. Okay, try to do these quicker. We've got about 10 minutes left. Holy moly. Okay, I'm gonna do these, try rapid fire. What if the work provided is not good enough? How can we control it before it goes out? Again, I would think if this is more like a performance management question, if the role filler is not doing their job and publishing information correctly, or it might just simply be, again, you need a role to copy edit or a policy that says that nothing can be published to the web unless it goes to this particular role for review, something like that. Yeah, done. What if is the Constitution customized, or is it to be used as written? I would say use it as written. It is theoretically possible to make amendments to the Constitution itself, but we highly advise against it, at least in early practice, until you get the basic process down. But it is possible. When you're posting job descriptions, what kind of job titles do you use? Yeah, it's kind of tricky. So again, the hiring process can look different for different organizations. Zappos has a great tool that kind of organizes all this stuff in the back end. I make no, well, I want to be transparent in that by differentiating the people from the roles, and I think the complexity question kind of gets to that, the tools that you need to actually do some of these things, to hire and fire or gather information about the skills that are needed that might trigger the need for a hire, we need new systems for that, because a lot of the traditional systems that are out there are based on a fundamental assumption that a person equals one job. And Holacracy does not have that assumption. So there are companies that are creating those things. And again, Zappos is a great example of kind of a do-it-yourselfer who's created the tools that they've needed to figure all that stuff out. How does Holacracy support operational growth? Again, through the development of the governance and people energizing their work day to day, using their best creative capacity. That's all operations, right? Day to day, people just getting stuff done. In Holacracy, we say nothing gets in the way of the work. It's primarily about the work of the organization. So yeah, that's what it's all about. Examples of where Holacracy has not worked and what were the reasons for this. Yeah, in Brian's book, I forget the chapter, maybe, I'm gonna get this wrong, let's say 6 or 7, but don't hold me to that. Brian Robertson's book, Holacracy, there is a chapter on that. I think there are a couple of reasons. Leaders that decided that or thought they wanted to do this, but ultimately did want the veto power, for whatever reason, got spooked, got freaked, and just wanted the power back. Make no judgment about that. That system works great, of course, for some organizations. So that's one reason. I think not really committing to following the rules is really hard. We've just learned to try to influence and sometimes even manipulate people and use politics to get things done. And the people who are really good at that go up in the organization. It's rewarded, right? So these are skills we've all learned. Trying to unlearn them is very, very difficult. The implementation process is very focused, and it's a difficult process. And we leave a lot of the practice up to the clients themselves. And some decide that for whatever reason, either the leader or they just don't have the systems and tools in place to pull it off. That's another limiting factor. Yep, same question about the CEO and the ratification. Yep, same answer. Is the rule book the same for every org? Yep, the Constitution is the same for every organization. What would a wage salary structure look like? There's an example on Glassfrog, the org chart of Holacracy 1 that I showed you. You can access that live. You can go to that. You have to find the link on the webpage. I apologize, I don't know the direct link. But you can search there for a badge, and it'll show you how we handle our salary structure using a badge-based system. But yes, you clearly need some new ways of doing it. That's another reason why sometimes implementations fail, is they don't update the way in which hiring and firing work, and there's too much confusion between kind of the shadow power structure and the rules being the power structure. That's another reason. The rule book does not talk about salary negotiations or conflict management. Of course, important things to handle, but not specified directly. You would get that probably from our COP or from our coaches. What would make sense for your organization. I can't help you understand the lead link and rep link in detail. except for the fact that you may be able to find something on the FAQ. You can also search for Holacracy FAQ. It's like a Wikipedia page, and there'll be some detail on there about the lead link and rep link. It's a really interesting topic. Great question. Does everyone need to understand the rule book? No. Again, think of it like a sport. I've played baseball and soccer many times. I don't think I've ever looked at the actual rule book. Hopefully in the future, right? Just like the traditional system, people will just pick this up. You know, kids that are coming out of college and working in organizations in which holacracy is being practiced and run, and they don't have the same experience. This is what working is like for them. You know, their assumptions and expectations, of course, are going to be very different. So, you know, hopefully in the future, this just becomes a standard, a version like this. If it's not holacracy, something that's going in this direction as a new paradigm, differentiating the roles from the people, it'll just become expected. And you refer to the Constitution only when needed. How many roles does an individual hold on average? Excuse me. I'm still getting over a little bit of a cold. Apologize. It's really difficult to say because I don't know for other organizations. I would say 15 to 18 for my organization, Holacracy One. And I would say for most clients that I've worked with at the beginning, probably 6 or 7 first couple months, and then that tends to grow a bit over time. Yeah, good question. Okay, I'm gonna try it. You're going to ask more questions than as I answer them. This is fun trying to keep up with them, though. How does compensation and benefits must be designed for these roles? Yeah, again, lots of different ways. We prefer a badge-based system. You can find that online. Yeah, and the current labor laws, this is a great question. How do you fire someone if current labor laws require a pathway of documentation that are consistent with the old systems and not holacracy? It's a great question. It's actually not as hard as it sounds. One of the benefits of holacracy is actually you've got usually way more documentation than you might have otherwise. So you would just build those things in to your governance structure as needed, all the things to conform to the law and have that be very, very clear. The way companies are structured legally, ownership-wise with holacracy, the whole legal dimension of the intersection between companies using holacracy and the legal structure is a fascinating topic in and of itself. And there's a few experts out there that we work with that are dedicated just to that question, helping companies, particularly startups, try to answer that. Good question. Here's a question about the lead link and resources. Does it mean the lead link can tell someone to fill a role? It can't tell somebody. It has to ask somebody. I think it's a good way of summarizing it that in holacracy, the way we work together is largely about asking. No one can direct or tell people stuff. We seem to have this assumption that if we don't tell people stuff, that they won't do it. When the reality that I've seen time and time again is people actually want to express themselves. They like getting things done. The problem is they just have barriers in their way, right? And so by removing those barriers and having transparency and asking questions, getting data, that allows us to work together in a much more collegial way, quite frankly. But it does require a bit of a mind shift from the notion that if we don't direct and demand people do things, that they won't do them. That may be true of some people, and of course, you probably shouldn't work with them. But the vast majority of us, that's not true. Yeah, good question about implementations. Man, I wish I had time. I've got about 2 minutes left scheduled. I might even stay just a minute or two extra because I like these questions. Implementation process, we targeted about 6 months. And try to build in as much internal capacity as we can. And then we stay around and offer high-level coaching, facilitate all of the meetings to begin with. As I mentioned, the process itself, the meeting process of the governance in particular is very specialized. So that's an insufficient answer for the implementations. But again, if you want to know more, please email me. Defining priorities and allocating resources is not effectively directing the work. By directing the work, again, I mean telling somebody what to do. If a lead link may say, this is the highest priority project, and the lead link may say, you have no money for it, right? You could say that. Okay, well, that's just the constraints I'm working with. He's not going to tell me how to achieve that end, right? He has no authority to demand how I do it. And if you think about it, even in a traditional organization where that is the expectation, the reality of it is managers aren't going around and physically grabbing people's hands and making them type an email or something, right? They're just telling them they should do it, and the person is using that information and making a decision for political reasons or whatever that they'll do it. They're still making that decision. I think Holacracy just brings a lot more transparency to that people are making these decisions themselves. And by honoring that and sharing the data, I find in practice that that's generally all you need. And having a lead link to find priorities and allocating the resources is another actually liberating structure. We talked about the old system and the comfort that it can provide. I find a lead link that says this is the highest priority project, or there's funding for this and not that, is actually tremendous. It's great because it helps me figure out where I'm going to spend my energy. It's in no way kind of directing me overall, how I should be doing it, because I've got several other goals. All right, everybody. So I'm going to honor the time, and I'm going to stick around maybe for another minute or two. I'm going to do a quick scan. Like I said, I wasn't going to be able to answer everything, although that's always my goal. It's ambitious. Thank you all so much for your time. If you have any questions about any of this stuff, I understand it is, it's hard to kind of just get until you see it. There's lots of ways to do that. If you have questions, or again, if you have other questions, anything, just feel free to email me, and I'll make sure it gets to the right person if I can't answer it myself. I'll answer maybe one or two more questions, and then, I'll answer one or two more, but if you need to go now, thanks so much. Let me pick one last question, actually, one last one that I could do. Okay, I'm going to take this last one, which is, how does it look if a new organization is joining an existing organization? I think there's a couple different ways to interpret this. There's merging of cultures. We have a client, ARCA, in financial services, based out of North Carolina. You can find them online. They've written things about it. They just did a merger with an Italian company, and they've talked a lot about the challenges with that and their experience with trying to manage that using Holacracy. But also, again, just like we're experiencing in this webinar, there is a need for kind of constant education and constant onboarding as organizations take on new people, whether or not it's a whole organization or not, just an individual coming on board. Has a lot to kind of learn about how things work. But thankfully, we have a lot of resources to help them do that. We're still, in many ways, carving this out and figuring this out together, kind of honoring the general spirit of how Holacracy works with transparency and data. We're figuring it all out, and we've got a lot there. But we always need more. So if you're interested in learning more about how Holacracy works in organizations, or what the next steps for you may be, there's lots of resources online, of course, but feel free to email me as well. I really, really appreciate your time. I wish I could stay on, actually, and answer all the questions, but we're a little bit over. I just want to thank you all again from all the different locations that you've joined from. And yes, my final word would be, we are going to send out a recording of this webinar to you for everyone that signed up. So you'll be able to review it if needed. And just thank you all so much for your time. Happy holidays to everybody. Thanks again.